Okay, everyone, something significant has unfolded over the past 24 hours, and it's time for us to take a closer look at what's happening in the Western Hemisphere. The United States is ramping up its pressure on Venezuela, and it seems like we could be on the edge of military action. Now, it's no secret that President Trump has long been opposed to the government of Nicolas Maduro, but the reasons being put forward to the world are centered around the so-called cartels. However, the real motivations go much deeper than that. Throughout history, U.S. foreign policy has been filled with attempts to change or even topple regimes that it deems undesirable, and this case is no different. The situation doesn't smell right at all. Recently, Trump issued a declaration instructing all airlines to treat Venezuela's airspace as entirely closed. And that's not a statement you make unless something major is on the horizon. This isn't just theatrical, folks. Even if it's merely a threat, the U.S. has gone too far. There are probably operations underway that we're not privy to yet. This is a clear show of strength from the United States military, which remains the most powerful force in the Western Hemisphere. It's also a stark reminder to Latin America about who's calling the shots. In a way, this is a geopolitical warning. The U.S. footprint in Latin America is not going to vanish anytime soon. And Trump is well aware that Venezuela's own military can't stand up to the U.S. in the long run. This move from the United States appears to be a desperate one. Reports are already coming in that U.S. forces are gathering in the region. U.S. warships carrying fighter jets are actively patrolling the Caribbean Sea. Furthermore, Trump has hinted that the U.S. may be planning land operations within Venezuela. So brace yourselves, folks. The decision may have already been made. There have been plenty of analyses discussing the cartel side of things, so I won't revisit that angle, but I want to dive deeper into the economic aspects of this situation, which I believe is the true driving force behind this major threat. At the heart of it all, it's about consolidating power. Ladies and gentlemen, the real reason behind this push is oil, and the United States maintaining an iron grip on the region's resources. The Colombian president even commented that oil is central to Trump's strategy with Venezuela. He believes that the negotiations revolve around oil, which suggests that the U.S. is looking to exert control over Maduro's oil production. This isn't a far-fetched theory. In fact, it makes perfect sense. The U.S. is desperately trying to bring inflation under control, and the driving force behind rising consumer price index (CPI) has been energy prices. Inflation has crept above 3% in recent months, and Trump himself has mentioned that Venezuela could play a significant role in global energy prices coming down to help stabilize the U.S. economy. If something were to happen in Venezuela, particularly in the context of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine situation, we could potentially see oil prices drop even further, and the reduction in oil and gasoline prices under Trump's leadership has been critical to making everyday goods more affordable. Did he just say the quiet part out loud? We need to connect the dots, people. The U.S. needs to cut interest rates as quickly as possible to keep the economic engine running, especially in the realm of AI. But to justify those cuts, inflation cannot keep rising. This is likely why Federal Reserve officials are so adamant about downplaying inflation. It's probably also why the U.S. is intensifying its pressure on Venezuela today. Venezuela currently exports around 800,000 barrels of oil per day, which accounts for less than 1% of global oil consumption. The country is under severe sanctions, and its oil industry is in ruins, particularly when compared to global heavyweights like Russia and Saudi Arabia. It was Trump's own sanctions during his first term that caused Venezuela's oil sector to collapse. Oil production literally plummeted, taking a huge chunk of global supply with it. Looking back, we can now see that this strategy may have backfired, especially during the trade war period. Energy costs have been one of the primary drivers of inflation, and the last thing the U.S. needs is higher energy prices to compound the problem. What the U.S. likely wants is control over Venezuela's oil production, the ability to ramp it back up, and with a very big condition attached. Venezuela would be under U.S. orders. They'll tell Venezuela how much oil it can produce, who it can sell it to, and most importantly, that all oil transactions must be made using U.S. dollars. No funny business with euros or Chinese renminbi. The potential of Venezuelan oil is enormous, and Trump certainly wants to get his hands on it. Now, let's look at the discrepancy between Venezuela's crude oil reserves and the amount it actually exports. The country has over 300 billion barrels of oil reserves, more than Iran, Canada, or even Saudi Arabia. That's almost 6 times more than the U.S. Yet, because of sanctions, Venezuela only exports less than $4 billion worth of oil. If production ramps up, it could flood global markets with millions of barrels of oil each day. Increased supply would result in lower prices worldwide, which would in turn help reduce energy inflation, especially in the U.S. This would make a strong case for the Fed and Trump to cut interest rates. So I hope the pieces of the puzzle are starting to fit together. By controlling oil production, the U.S. could influence the largest oil reserves on the planet, as well as how transactions are made. This is also a battle to protect the remaining vestiges of the petrodollar system. Now, who do you think is the biggest buyer of Venezuelan crude? It's China. In fact, a large portion of Venezuela's oil exports goes to China, and the volumes have been increasing dramatically. Around 84% of Venezuela's oil exports go to Chinese buyers, either directly or indirectly. China has been benefiting from cheap energy from Maduro, and they're probably the only country in the world able to withstand U.S. sanctions without facing any pushback. It's highly likely that the Chinese are paying for this oil in their local currency, the renminbi, rather than using U.S. dollars. This is a direct threat to the petrodollar system. However, Trump can't just go after China directly. If he tries to sanction Chinese banks, it would send shockwaves through the global financial system. If he raises tariffs on Chinese goods, China will retaliate by restricting the export of rare earth minerals. So Trump is in a bit of a bind. Financial sanctions won't work at this point, and that's why trying to control Venezuela's oil resources might be his only option left. The military buildup in the Caribbean is likely not just about fighting cartels, it's about oil. Nearly half of Venezuela's oil production is controlled by foreign companies. About 18% is controlled by Russia and China, while U.S.-based Chevron controls around 23%. But the vast majority is still under the control of the state-owned oil company, PDVSA. Because of the sanctions, very few foreign companies are willing to invest in Venezuela's oil sector. Through its sanctions, the U.S. can exert control over how oil is sold, ensuring that it's only sold in U.S. dollars and not in Chinese renminbi or any other currency. The U.S. is probably going to try to impose its will on Venezuela because the stakes are just too high. The consolidation of power in the Western Hemisphere is not something that's going to stop. While a full-scale invasion seems unlikely, the pressure on Venezuela is mounting, and tough negotiations are almost certainly on the horizon. The U.S. has already designated Venezuela as a state sponsor of terrorism, which is likely to push oil production even further down. Venezuela's oil companies may soon face penalties just for using the ports essential for oil exports, and this broad rule will scare companies away from expanding operations in Venezuela. But the pressure is coming from all sides, both military pressure and sanctions targeting oil production. Control is the name of the game here, and the U.S. will likely try to prevent the dollar from being dethroned as the global reserve currency. Can Trump succeed in this endeavor? It's not going to be easy. The real obstacle is not Venezuela's military, but the presence of Russia and China in the region. Both of these countries will likely protect their interests in Venezuela. Russia has already issued a statement supporting Venezuela, declaring that it will stand by Maduro if the situation escalates. This could lead to Russian intelligence and weapons being used to counterbalance the U.S.'s military actions. China, for its part, has a lot at stake in Venezuela. They have been supporting Venezuela for years, especially through investments in the energy sector as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. If things escalate into a full-scale armed conflict, China's investments could go up in smoke. Between 2005 and 2015, Chinese state-owned companies invested nearly $3 billion into Venezuela's oil sector, and Chinese banks have provided over $62 billion in loans to the country. If the U.S. invades, China would stand to lose a massive amount of money, and they won't take that lying down. They might use the leverage of rare earth minerals, which are critical to the global tech industry, to retaliate. If an invasion does occur, we can expect Latin America and many countries in the BRICS alliance, including Brazil, to condemn the U.S. action. This would only increase China's influence in the region, further diminishing U.S. power. The global oil supply could also take a hit, and the U.S. economy itself would suffer as the costs of waging a war drive up domestic energy prices. The U.S. would be forced to import more energy at a higher cost, leading to inflation. Meanwhile, China's economy would continue to grow as it reaps the benefits of cheaper energy. Ultimately, any military action by the U.S. would have severe consequences both for Venezuela and for the U.S. itself. The U.S. may try to force more concessions from Venezuela and increase oil production, but it's unlikely to come without serious strings attached. President Trump has already hinted at the importance of Venezuela's oil, but the question is, will the U.S. be able to navigate this delicate geopolitical web, or will it make a monumental mistake by escalating tensions further? What do you think? Is the U.S. truly headed for Venezuela, or is this just a case of Trump blustering? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Stay safe, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we navigate these turbulent times.